Attorney, Town Manager, a few folks from the audience, Town Clerk, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
How you doing, Roger?
Good. How you doing?
We have a guest this morning. We've got Mr. Brandon Prince here from DeAngelis Diamond, the general contractor for Margaritaville TPI. And since these are working men, we want to get them up here and give us a report, and they can be on their way for the rest of their day. So, Mr. Prince, would you like to come up and give us a little?
Either side.
Either one.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for letting me come up here. And I wouldn't say special, but you know, we're trying to do something big there. But Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor.
I say that to everybody. Don't
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Feeling better. Thank you. Just want to give you guys a quick update. Obviously, milestones. Last time we were here, we were asking for something. I thought this time we'd more so give. So right now we're on the 3rd floor, pouring out. The 2nd building, level 2, is going up. So we're working on both sides of the street. Building 3 is getting out of the ground now as well. Our bridge is set to come in over the summer. So got a lot of big things planned going on, and I just wanted to extend an offer to see if any of you all here in the next month or so, as we approach the big milestone of turning over the parking lot, if you all would like to come down for a hard hat tour and just check out the job site just from a skeleton view, because I know you all obviously see the finished product here in about a year or so, but didn't see that there. At any point, I know, Roger, I have your contact info, so if any of you all want to schedule something, or you know, maybe it's separate tours, we're always here for you guys. So we'd love it to have you guys down there and just see things from a bird's eye view.
That sounds great.
When you say bridge, do you mean the walkover?
Yeah, yep. So that's coming around August, September. So
When you say that's coming around, you mean sort of the frame of it'll be put in August?
So it comes as an entire assembled piece.
Later.
Really?
So we just lift it and set it and connect the 2 buildings. So, and then
That'll be this summer in August?
Yep.
Wow.
We'll connect the 2 buildings.
Any questions for Brandon?
Are you still optimistic on the September 2023 date?
Oh yeah, we're gonna hit it.
Beautiful.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Weather permitting.
Weather permitting. That's it. A couple weather days here and there. No, absolutely. I appreciate you guys. And,
Are you going to pass, are you going to pass the real vulnerable time for storms, or are you know, are there things that could really set you back if you get a big storm?
Not really. I mean, it's just a day, really. I mean, we're getting to a point now where we're topping out, so the weather really isn't going to affect us. We're going to start some of the interior framing probably in the next month and a half. So a lot of the weather-dependent things are kind of behind us, I feel, as we get through the summer. We should top out towards the end of the summer on all the buildings. So we'll start masonry, and we'll be weather tight. So.
You're going to have a ceremony for topping out?
I think that's the plan. I'll need to talk to ownership, but I'm pretty sure that right now the plan is when the bridge is like our topping out ceremony. So I'm sure that Mr. Torgerson will probably be in contact with you guys. Usually we do something with the town or different municipalities. Everyone comes out, signs the beam, you know, and right before we hoist it into place. So
Good.
Are the supply chain challenges that you face pretty visible now, or or will there be surprises down the road? In other words, do you know what they all are at this point, or do they still pop up on a regular basis?
they pop up, but I mean, projects like this are pre-planned years in advance. So really staying on top of the supply chain and the materials has been one of our biggest, you know, hassles. But we've got a pretty good staff, knowledgeable staff, that we're able to stay proactive with it and order materials well in advance. So we're really not, you know, what we used to get in, you know, 2 or 3 weeks, we're having to plan 4 to 6 months in advance. So we kind of knew that going ahead of time. Drew, who's a colleague of mine, he's kind of like we have a software called Procore that manages pretty much the entire progress and processes to order all the materials. So we're pretty well ahead of the curve on material right now in supply chain. So hasn't been a hassle. I mean, it's always a headache. You're always scratching your head like, are we going to get it? But it always Oh, it shows up. We lock in dates a month in advance, so.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Brandon, well, good luck with what's going on. Keep your men safe out there.
Absolutely.
And give my best to John DeAngelis when you're speaking with him.
Will do.
And anything else for Brandon?
Well, we'd like him to keep the women safe, too.
Oh, well, that's, workmen, that's, I'm sorry.
We have our big, because it's Workers' Safety Month, so construction especially. Do you know what day that, I think it's the 26th of this month?
Yeah, I think it's in 2 weeks. I don't know if
We basically have like a big celebration for safety. We usually have some of the suppliers come out, do demonstrations, big lunch. Again, you all are more than welcome to come down and check that out. So it'll be a pretty big party. Probably 300 plus people will be on site for that. So it's a pretty big event that we do for Construction Safety Week. So
We're not much for parties down here, Brandon. But anyhow, thanks so much, and
thank you.
good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
luck.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by,
Have a good one.
too. All right, the next item is workforce housing. We're going to discuss housing options. Sarah, good morning.
Good morning. Sarah Probst with Community Development. In November, staff was asked to look into what options may be available for the town to create workforce housing stock on the island and potentially off the island. Through research and interviews, I have come up with several strategies that the town can use to develop or to encourage the development of workforce housing. The basis for this workforce housing program would be a community land trust, also known as a CLT. The CLT would be a nonprofit run by a board, and the CLT would manage workforce housing units, land owned by the CLT, sales, leasing, and all of the eligibility requirements. Workforce housing units development could be encouraged by the town through several changes to the Land Development Code and also the Comprehensive Plan. One option that would be available is to allow increased density and height for developments that agree to put units into a workforce housing pool for 30 or 50 years. This could also include allowing duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes in neighborhoods where currently only single-family or duplex units are allowed. These units would be required to look as if they were single-family homes. Several communities have done this pretty successfully. Another way workforce housing units could be encouraged is by modifying the pre-disaster build-back policy. Currently, the policy allows the redevelopment of property that is over density if the number of units is decreased and additional square footage is not created. The policy could be amended to allow over density developments to keep the same number of units without limiting square footage, as long as the over density units were put into a workforce housing program for 30 or 50 years. Another simple way to encourage additional workforce housing units is by reducing parking requirements or allowing parking to be shifted to a nearby site. If a development can reduce the amount of land needed for parking, the cost of the project can be reduced, potentially allowing for workforce housing units to be developed. Developments that utilized this policy or this option would be required to dedicate units to the workforce housing pool. Developments that agreed to dedicate units to the workforce housing pool could also be eligible for reduction in impact fees and permit fees. Another program that the CLT could use is essentially a reverse mortgage program. This program would help current residents stay in their home by giving them an upfront payment for their home, but they would continue to live there. So this would help residents that currently live here and maybe are facing some income issues and needing to move away. This could help them stay in their homes. And then once those homeowners moved out or passed away, that home would become property of the CLT, which would then be part of the CLT housing stock. All of these options are going to create some additional opportunities, but will not create many units quickly. Gaining workforce housing stock on the island will be a slow process. It's important to note that these options are not the same options that Mr. Goodson had spoken about. The Lee County Housing Authority has different options that would be available to them, and it makes more sense for the Lee County Housing Authority to do development off-island due to the cost of land. So while we have different strategies, they could work together, but they wouldn't work with the same options, essentially. Some of these proposed options can be accomplished through LDC changes, and others will be supported by comprehensive plan policies. I'd love to hear your feedback regarding any of the options that were in the paper or in the memo that I gave you. And if you have any other suggestions, that's also appreciated. And Mr. Goodson has graciously agreed to join us to assist with this conversation. It looks like he stepped out for the moment, but he also is open for questions.
Questions?
One of the questions I had that came to mind when you were talking about decreasing impact and permit fees. The fees that we have, the taxes and things here are small in comparison to Lee County. Is there any precedent for doing some kind of interlocal with Lee County that would get them to agree to some kind of tax reduction or something for the property for workforce housing here? I mean, we are part of Lee County. Am I going out on a crazy limb, or?
Well, I think that, it's something that we can always talk to them about. I gotta believe that they have a similar concern, as well as the population of the county and the popularity of the county is growing. They have the counter argument, if you will, that they're struggling to meet the needs of that growth, which impact fees and those other fees pay for. But, it's mainly the impact fees that really kind of, will affect a project of that nature. And they're generally, if it's, government-owned land, which is the basis for a large development, they're usually would be waived in other places that I work. So it's definitely something we could talk to them about.
Well, I was thinking more of the real estate tax idea that I know in other states I've seen that they will do some kind of tax reduction.
Yeah, I
for
don't know.
businesses and
Yeah, I don't
things.
know. I think there's some statutory limits on that, John.
Yeah, there is some statutory provisions that allow for the owner-operators, in this case potentially the land trust, to petition the local property appraiser to reduce the tax assessment based upon the affordability issue. There are provisions already in state law that allow that to happen.
Okay.
So they certainly can take advantage of that if they fit within the statutory criteria that obviously is the responsibility of the tax assessor or the property appraiser, to ultimately determine.
So
if
it
they
wouldn't
need-
have to be approved by the county commissioners? The state
No.
law allows you
No,
to go
it's-
directly to the tax assessor?
Correct.
Now, what,
Great, that would be great to add to our info so that, while we're trying to entice developers to let them know that we would support them in that kind of endeavor.
now, I'm gonna interject here real quick, but now, so the different potential entities that could own the property, would that affect the property tax? It doesn't matter if it's a town or a nonprofit or a land trust?
If it meets the affordability thresholds under the state law, then they're eligible for the tax
Discount.
reduction.
Well, that was one thing I wanted to bring up. The other thing is that I support everything that I'm seeing here, and I think that it can work together. I don't think that we need to pick one of these, although it's a lot of work to do all of them. I think that pursuing all of this looks like it's such a big problem that you can't just attack it from one direction. You've got to have a lot of incentives in different ways. So, and I wanted to say this was so well written and so concise. I appreciated that it had a lot of information packed into a small space, and it was very enlightening.
Thank you.
So probably, I'm sorry, Jim.
That's all right.
The first step would probably be getting this community land trust established, and then we're for real. And then that's the entity that can solicit these various, tax incentives and this and that and everything else. And
Well, I think maybe the first thing to decide is a land trust the entity we want?
well, I'm assuming that it is, just assuming that it is, but or whatever entity it is. But and then that kind of puts us on the map, and then everybody knows that we're we're for real about it, and,
Well, I guess
we
I
go.
see as two things possibly happening simultaneously. Community Land Trust is the nonprofit way to go forward, but the things in item 2 are to encourage private development, and I don't want to be going after the land trust to the exclusion of private developers coming in and,
no.
But, you know, because listening to the history of Sanibel, and they've got, 40, 50 years' experience with this, is they've got a land trust, and the only thing the land trust is used for is the attainable part of housing. If you want to be able to have people buy a place based on income requirements, and then when they sell it back, sell it with those same requirements. If that's a feature you want, that's when you need a land trust. But if you want this property owned by an entity that rents it out, then exclusively, then you don't need a land trust. Then like Sanibel has a nonprofit that does it.
Yes.
So, and we've talked before, and I understand that, you put a lot of hooks in the water, right? Because this is a big job, and if, I don't want to necessarily exclude something if it comes along. But I'm just not sure whether I'm really sold on the attainable housing. Just, people may own it, and, I understand if they own it, they have responsibility to maintain it. So you get a little bit of money up front, you have lower maintenance costs, but then you're not really building up an inventory. You're not building up the financial momentum to make this entity self-sustaining in the long run.
Jim?
Sir, I have a question for you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if we were to create this framework via Community Land Trust or the Sanibel model, and it's the way, and I think you're right to say these are a lot of good ideas, and you're right to say this is going to proceed very slowly because of the land issues. But if you were emperor for the day, and I have I see our empress, sorry, and we have our friends from the county here as well, and we could solve that land issue. For example, we just recently acquired a plot of land behind the town hall that's zoned residential. If we were to, through this framework, have something built there, how would you design it? How many units could we have there? And would that be a way to really jumpstart this process and maybe even allow the county to help us in that exercise?
I'm not sure how the county would be involved, but, and maybe Marcus can speak to that, but I think the first step would be to address density and height issues. I think that at this point in time, based on, I don't know exactly the size of the land, but one of the biggest issues in developing housing is the density is very low, and if we increase density, we also have to increase height. And that way, more units can be built at a more affordable price. Right now, most of the parcels on the island can only allow 1 unit, maybe 2 units. If we found specific areas where we would feel comfortable increasing that density, allowing some an additional number of units, and maybe that looks like a quadplex in a house that looks like a single-family house. So one of the things that Eddie and I have talked about, and I think that we may have spoken with some of you about, is options to have designs that are available for developers who are interested in doing this. That eliminates some of the architectural costs, some of the structural engineering costs. They certainly still have some of those costs, but by giving them that initial layout and saying, this fits on the property, it meets all of our codes, and they could have 4 units, and maybe they agree to put 2 units in regular and have them at market rate, and then have 2 units in the workforce housing pool. That's one option because it lowers their upfront costs and it gives them comfort knowing that that will be approved and that the town is happy with it. I think right now a lot of people coming forward, especially, for example, doing the pre-disaster Buildback, a lot of people may have too many units on their property and they're trying to decide what to do. They'd like to maintain some of those units, but the way it currently exists, they have to come in and do a rezoning. That rezoning opens up the whole process, and they don't have a lot of comfortability regarding if that's going to get through. So they can put in a lot of money in architectural and engineering and attorney fees, potentially get in front of you, and then get rejected. So maybe right now they have 4 units, but they're small and they're not very nice, and they need to be elevated, and it needs to, you know, be redeveloped in order to meet all of the building and flood codes. But they don't know what to do with it. So right now they've got their 4 units that don't meet any of the code criteria, and if they could come to you knowing that you would feel comfortable with a certain design, or you would allow them to rebuild those 4 units, you know, 2 of them in workforce, 2 at market rate, that would make them more comfortable in coming forward, making those modifications to their house, you know, redeveloping it, and it would create some workforce housing options. So there are a lot of factors on how to make this work on the island, but a lot of it is about the comfortability of coming forward and trying to resolve it, not knowing what they're gonna be allowed to continue to keep.
If I could challenge our friends from the county here on this, if we actually own a plot of land right behind Town Hall, and if we were to make the appropriate zoning changes that Sarah recommended or referenced, and we could build a quadplex back there for workforce housing, can you envision any kind of a role for the county to help us in that process?
Good morning. For the record, Marcus Goodson, Lee County Housing Authority. Thank you for Sarah for inviting me down to listen this morning and learn more about what it is you want to try to accomplish. We could certainly, you know, craft some kind of relationship where the Housing Authority or one of our affiliate nonprofits could work with the beach to be a part of the management of the property. We could figure out in terms of ownership structure how that works for you as well, because as you know, local government doesn't typically own property, multifamily property. So there's certainly a role that we could play. I got to tell you, our experience has been that our developments are in the 60 unit to 90 unit to 100 unit development size. So this would be something new for us, but we certainly manage 100 unit projects. We could certainly manage a quadplex or something even smaller. Not to say that that's not what we're interested in. Our experience has been with larger developments. So we certainly could play a role. We'd have to figure out exactly what that role would be, but I think we could craft something that would work for you.
Would you be aware of any dollars that could potentially come with that assistance?
Yeah, the county. So with the rescue plan funds, right now, United Way is the portal to submit for rescue plan funds. Now, the problem is the applications are due tomorrow by 5 o'clock. When I leave here, I'm headed back to the office where I've got a team of staff working on a request for us right now. But outside of those funds, there are also other funds that the county has in place that you could certainly pursue. They have a housing trust account that they awarded $1.5 million to our project over in Cape Coral. By the way, we closed on the land acquisition yesterday, so that project is moving forward. So yes, the county would be the way to go to try to pursue some funds there. And my experience with the county has been very pleasant. If there's money available, they try to work with you when it comes to workforce housing, affordable housing, because they recognize the need in the community. So I would say for a quadplex, yeah, that's not a heavy lift. And if you've got the dirt, that's the big hurdle to get over.
We've got the dirt. Yep. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Marcus, before you walk away real quick, just a question for you as we've been talking. Has there ever been any models in your experience where larger corporations, if you will, have worked together to do something? You know, the larger companies that need the biggest need for employees, like say for instance, some of the hotels on the island here. Have you ever seen where they've worked together to build a development, seeing as that they would get, you know, the reward to help offset some of the costs? Obviously the land is one thing, but the building of the building itself.
There are some national examples I could try to pull for you. Locally, I'm not familiar with any one company that has done that. Of course, you've got this wonderful project down the street, and I had mentioned to Sarah in a conversation, you know, it'd be great if you could get, you know, Margaritaville involved in something like that. But locally, I'm not familiar with any company that has stepped up. They all talk about it because they recognize the need, but They typically, depend on local government to provide that affordable workforce housing product. But nationally, there are some examples. I could research and pull some for you.
Yeah, just curious to see if there's anything, where the local municipalities have worked with corporations to be able to, jointly build something that benefits everyone.
No, there's some national examples. I see it come across my desk in email blast. I could pull something for you and see if there's something perhaps we could model here.
Thank you.
And I would just,
Go ahead, Bill.
I was gonna say, that I understand like the incentives for getting projects to include a workforce housing element, which is all good. I think my preference would be have it condominiumized so that they could be, ownership could be transferred instead of, I realize that 30 to 50 years is a long time out, and, I'm probably not gonna be here. But that, the other thing is that a way to have, cash in lieu of units that then we could use to build exclusive workforce housing projects. And part of the zoning things we would look at is saying that if it is exclusively a workforce housing project, then maybe there's additional allowances for density, because typically I understand at Sanibel, their demand is for one-bedroom places. So if you have smaller places and you can put more of them in as part of a exclusively workforce housing project, then that makes that more, I guess, functional.
That's a perfect segue to what I wanted to mention. Could you hand that to Amy? Amy, could you put this up on the screen? This is a building that I've mentioned before, and I just don't want it to fall off our radar. This building is the Astera. It's already built. It's been empty for years, so evidently no one wants to buy it. It's been for sale for years. It has bathrooms, it has an elevator, it has parking. So I don't know how we can work with this, but I'd like to keep this on our radar. It's the perfect place to turn into one bedroom or efficiencies, as Bill indicates there's that need.
You know what the price is?
It's probably somewhere in that paperwork that she has, but I'm just mentioning it because I don't want it to fall off our radar. The fact that it's been empty and for sale for years without moving tells me that we need to maybe reach out and say, hey, work with us on how we can make this happen.
Roger or Bill, do you guys know what the revenue stream is, this recent increase of the rental fee? Do we know what that's solely focused for affordable workforce housing? Do we know what that revenue stream is that the town's now bringing in as a result of that?
Well, I think that, I think that we have roughly 2,000 short-term rental permits, and the increase is $250. So you do the math, that's 500,000.
And that's annually?
That's annually. That's just, back of the napkin numbers.
Yeah.
But that really kicked in January, which is after everybody registered, or 85% of people are already registered, so that really won't kick in till
Next year, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what about the parking rate increases? That's been going since day one. So
Right, that has, and we're comfortable that we'll have a minimum of $500,000 of revenue to be dedicated towards something.
combined from both the rate
No,
increases,
from parking, 500,000 plus the
short-term rental fees.
short-term rental.
Huge increase in parking. Okay.
I don't know, I didn't hear anybody say that they,
I find your idea very intriguing.
Good.
I just was trying to get a sense of how we could cash flow it and what the revenue stream would be and how we could finance it, because I think that's a beautiful property, and it's located in an area that would reach a lot of the
zone
businesses.
commercial, so bringing it back to residential is bringing it in some ways backwards, so it should be easier than going from the other direction.
Yeah, and I would doubt that this would go for the price that we could find that, that Roger could find the money under the mattress like he did for the land, but there's also the option of bonding something on it.
And again, reaching out to the county for assistance. Here, we have a building that's already built.
It's got great bones.
Yeah, I mean, it's bigger than
I-
4 units behind Town Hall here. This could actually make an impact.
Yeah, no, my questions were, I like your idea. I'd say, my questions were just trying to help figure out how we could get it done, because I think it's a very intriguing idea.
Well, I think probably a conversation with the owner, because if the owner has other business interests on the island, maybe there's some incentive that could be used too.
And I know that Mr. Torgerson originally had endorsed the idea of workforce housing, tried to make it happen and had to get out of that. But maybe he could come back in and assist us with this somehow, because he's gonna need a place to put people.
Sarah, this building, if I'm not mistaken, is within one of those zones that you and Eddie presented to us.
CB?
Yeah, potentially rezoning for I think this was gonna be the Arts and Entertainment District.
Yes, yeah, I think that this was supposed to fall within the Arts and Entertainment District. And Roxanne, you had mentioned this building to me before, and I did some research on it, and it was, I don't remember what the price was, but it was more than I felt like we had, and I didn't, and I thought about reaching out to the Realtor, and I thought, no, I'm not in a position to do that at this point. I need to talk with everyone. We need to get a plan put forth, but.
The problem with that building is, for the owner, I walked past it every morning and thought about it myself several times about what could be done with that building. His problem is he's had it for sale or for lease for several years now, and no takers. They built the wrong thing there. They misjudged the market, the original developers. I know who they are. But there's no market for all that office space and everything upstairs. And that was what I was thinking early on was, we could convert that into a boutique hotel, motel sort of thing, But anybody that buys that building would have to, in their due diligence, would have to come and see what they could actually do with the building. So they would be coming before us for that change. And therein lies their problem, So it all depends how motivated this owner is, and apparently he or she is not very motivated because we haven't seen too much action there. So, but it's worth keeping, as you say, Vice Mayor, keeping it on the radar, no doubt.
Well, I've had, since we've started this discussion, I've met with a couple of developers, one that's local, and his partner's not local, but they were specifically looking at this area and this building, and their questions I couldn't answer because we obviously hadn't made those decisions yet. But, some of their questions were, a building like that, how high could you potentially go? They're doing the dollars and cents. They're aware of, they're following the meeting, so they're well aware of what we're talking about. But maybe just for the record, if you could kind of reiterate what we had talked about before with what the potential ideas could be for density height on a particular property like this.
And I genuinely do not recall what height we talked about in this district. I know that it was a focus on arts and theater, but we wanted to have sort of a mix of uses in there, so mixed-use buildings that maybe have, art galleries on the first floor and then living above, that type of thing. And I think the first floor would have to be commercial here based on the location with the flood code. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what height they were talking about, but they were talking about, this is one of the nodes with the increased density and the increased height that sort of tiered down towards the edges. Theoretically, this could be built higher if there were interest in that, and that were something that's sort of built into
And
the...
Sarah, normally, comment on this if you would. Normally, density on Fort Myers Beach is an ugly word because of obviously our traffic issues, but since folks who normally are driving off island to the middle of the island, would now be in the middle of the island and no longer driving, hopefully taking a bike or walking to work. I think density, the definition of density sort of, or how we look at density changes under this dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really important to think about density in a different way because currently most of the traffic is from people coming on and off the island. A lot of people that are on the island already can, take shorter trips, take their bike, hop on the bus. But if you have the people living near their job, fewer miles on the road, fewer cars potentially overall, because if you have somebody who already isn't making a lot of money and has the option to sell their car and stay completely on the island, they may not even need to have a car here.
And going against traffic. Yeah. Because, and I think, I agree with you, Councilman, that I'm looking at all this at the measure of traffic. I don't have a thing against density or intensity, but we're limited by traffic. And so if we add density that either alleviates or doesn't make traffic worse, then I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Mr. Goodson, if I could ask you one more question, now that you've seen this, I've kind of been watching you and you're nodding your head sometimes when you're hearing us talk. Does this spark any kind of ideas in your head as far as a county level, being able to work with us on a property like this?
Well, it's a beautiful building, first of all. And my immediate thought was, you know, yeah, a renovation would probably work nice in that building, but depending on the size of the property and the other zoning issues, height for one. We've seen it before in this community where, you know, investors purchase a property and they demolish it, and then, you know, they build something totally different. So depending on the height, you could possibly go up again. The acquisition price would play a role, but that is a beautiful building that, I don't know the size of it, but certainly could, you know, you could house some one-bedroom workforce housing in there, no question about it. You know, I don't know, maybe 12 units or something in that affair. Again, I don't know the size of it, but that would be beautiful.
Square footage on the front page, Amy.
Right, and then some commercial on the first floor, and I hear it's in the art district, so you could do something on the exterior that's artsy, you know.
17,992 it says.
17,992.
So, now you mentioned,
It's a nice building.
Sarah, you mentioned that you'd have to do commercial on the ground floor because I guess the flood is above the ground floor of that.
Yes, anything new being built on the island has to be up off the ground a bit. I mean, I don't know the exact elevation of this, but typically that's the way that this would work. Anything on the ground floor would not be habitable space.
Meaning they,
Ground floor is smaller than it looks because you actually come in the back and go under to park
okay,
where those trees are.
I was wondering when she was talking first floor, she meant the first floor above flood or the first floor on the ground
No,
level?
the ground.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, so you'd have ground floor with, you know, whatever you needed on the ground floor, but could not be residential space, and then living units above.
Yeah. Well, it seems like gonna be, you're talking, what, 20,000 square feet, is that what we said?
Close to it.
So that's 20 units at 1,000 square feet.
Well, I think that 20,000 includes that first floor too.
Oh, does it?
But it's smaller than the other two floors,
Yeah.
significantly
Yeah,
smaller.
I mean, if you wanted to sort of guesstimate, you could say every 2 units every 2 windows would be a unit on the 2 upper floors. So you have 8 windows, so you have 4, so you probably have, 16 units in there, something like that, maybe 20.
And, I mean, 1,000 square feet's an awful big one-bedroom.
Yeah.
That's right.
Too, way too big.
But
More
with
than you
with the
need.
overhead of the hallways and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a lot to the common space, common areas and all that. Usually it's markets like 15, 20%, you could lose to common space.
Right next to a bus stop, right next to the 7-Eleven.
And there are
Oh,
other
what's
properties,
nice down there,
I'd like to live there.
there's 3 hotels right there. There's the Outrigger, there's the Wyndham, there's, leave one out.
And it's close to Santini too for workforce and all that, so.
Well, that's kind of brings me back to that question that I had for Mr. Goodson earlier. This, if there was a way to work with the county and the town and some of the larger places on the island that have the most strain on getting employees onto the island, if there's a joint venture that could be had to make this, a viable situation.
There's always a joint venture possibility. We've been a part of a number of them over the years during my tenure, and I've been here now since '02 in Fort Myers. So there's always an opportunity for that. I think it's a wonderful building, and you're right, just from watching it and looking at it this morning, you may be talking 14, 15 units. And you're right, 1,000 square feet is a large one-bedroom. And for people working on the island, even efficiencies would work for a workforce housing, person.
So would, I'm sorry, so would it be inappropriate for us to reach out to the owner and say the council is interested in working with you? And let them know that we're willing to be flexible about some things in order to make this happen? Is that inappropriate?
Certainly something I would support.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with the conversation. I also think that maybe, to kind of Councilman Aller's idea, is that if this is owned by a land trust or whatever entity, and there's multiple units, maybe we can get some of the businesses to adopt some of those units. So if someone like TPI or the Pink Shell wants some units, that they contribute to this, to have put their people who are working in the unit.
Well, I think one of the main things that I could suggest to you is that my experience in dealing with folks like this is cash is king. So the first thing they want to know is, if we give you your number, whatever your number is, can you close in 90 days and do you have the cash? So, I think one of the things we're going to have to work hard on, whether it's this particular project or any other project, is going to be to develop a pool of cash that we can devote to it, because it's going to be the first question any and all partners are going to ask us. What do we have that we can put towards it?
So, I know bonding is a way to turn an income stream into upfront cash. Is there something we would take a loan out? Can we take a loan out to do this, or?
Well, the general rule of thumb is that if it's a property tax funded item of more than $10 million, this potentially would be, by the time you got done, you would have to have a referendum. If it's not general funded, then you don't have that limitation.
But do you consider this new revenue stream from the rental fee, is that general funded, or is that a unique revenue stream that would not fall under that category? Because we would have, if we did borrow money, we have $500,000 a year dedicated towards this cause, so that would certainly play a big role in debt servicing. John, would that fall into that category?
It would be, but obviously you lose the ability to have that money for other things. Because once you dedicate it.
But we can't use it for other things except for affordable housing anyways.
I think that the parking.
No, I'm not talking about parking. I'm talking about the rental fee, we were told, could only be used for affordable housing.
I think that was, my recollection is affordable housing and enforcement of the regulations.
So
Enhanced, increased enforcement.
Okay.
I think there's two things, Councilor Adult. There's a nexus of why you increase a fee. Why is there a need to increase a fee? And in the case of the rental, there was discussion about the fact that as problems convert to short-term rental, it's reducing our housing stock for non-short-term rentals. So there's a nexus there, but I think it is general fund revenue. If we were going to dedicate it to that, it would require a referendum.
And we don't know what you said. You think this would be over $10 million by the time we bought it?
Well, I think potentially it would be, but obviously, if we have a $5 million partner, then it's $5 million. But.
Yeah. And I do know that, from what I was told in the class, is that when you do bond against some income, you usually don't do all of it. So if we're making $500,000 a year, then you may say conservative, half of that money is available for bonding something.
Yeah, just be aware that anytime you say that we're going to put X towards a loan or a bond or whatever, that's your primary pledge, but you may have a secondary pledge, you even may have a tertiary pledge. The last pledge is always going to be your general revenue anyway. So if you say it comes from vacation rental fees, and for whatever reason you have a bad year or you don't generate enough revenue to pay that pledge, then if you have a secondary pledge, that'll be that, and I'll look to that to fill that gap. And then if that's inadequate, there's always going to be the last thing is, in any of these deals, it's always going to say your property tax is going to be your last bucket to do it, to fill the gap. And they're going to look for, typically they look for 15% coverage. So that means if you borrow $100,000, you're and whatever that payment is going to be the payment plus 15% to make sure that you can, if you have a bad year, you can cover it.
So Marcus, of course, we're just spitballing here and completely, just brainstorming. But if let's assume that was a $10 million project to procure and to renovate and so forth, given your experience with the county, and of course, no guarantees, no pledge here, but just what percentage of the county funds could potentially offset that 10 million, do you think, given your experience, could operate? We won't hold you to this, but just so we have some sense of how the county could help.
Yeah, well, right, yeah, please don't hold me to this, of course, but we just secured $1.5 million for a project in Cape Coral. It was 96 units. This may be 15 units, 18 units. I think this is obviously a unique project, would be a unique project in Lee County, to have Fort Myers Beach to commit to workforce housing, to recognize that there's a problem here, and to do what you can to start to address that problem. I think that would galvanize, county staff, county commissioners to try to do something to help out. That's my belief.
Marcus, that Cape Coral project, you secured 1.5. Where did the rest of it come from?
4% tax credits. We got some home money. We got CDBG money. And then we're going to sell the 4% tax credits along with the 1.5 million from the county.
So there wasn't any private money in there? It was
Not at all.
All public?
Not at all. Not at all. And there's typically 4% tax credits are undersubscribed. The 9% are the ones that are oversubscribed. But then you get into income restrictions. And so what I'm hearing here is more of a workforce housing product as opposed to an affordable product. So there are some income restrictions if you go the tax credit route. So we would have to kind of vet that out and see, and see what you all were comfortable, what you'd be comfortable with in terms of a mix of income.
How do those tax credits work?
So the 9% are extremely competitive. I mean, oversubscribed every cycle. So if you're fortunate enough to win an award, then you take maybe a couple $100,000 in tax credit awards, and then you sell them on the market, and then they generate cash. So when the economy was humming along, people like BB&T, SunTrust, RBC was very active in this market. They would purchase the tax credits, and they were purchasing the tax credits for more than $1. So they were purchasing a dollar tax credit for $1.04, $1.05. You could generate, depending on how much a larger award you got from Florida Housing, $10, $12, $14 million on a $20 million project. And then you would, go CDBG, you go home, you go sale funding, you go to the county, you go to Cape Coral, you go to Fort Myers, depending on where the project's located. And that's how you pull it together. Now that's affordable and that's income restricted. What we're talking about here for the most part is workforce housing. So we would have to find a different financing source.
Another potential source of income, although I stated I'm not really particularly sold on the idea, is if a land trust is to condominiumize it and then put some of this into the attainable housing. Then people who would buy into the attainable housing would, provide some income to start too.
Well, there's all kinds of ideas. Okay, Sarah, why don't you come up? We're going to conclude with you. Where are you hoping that we'll go today?
So I mostly wanted to hear how you guys felt about the different options. The next step is really working on the comprehensive plan. Eddie couldn't be here today, but I will get back together with him. He's going to be working on policies for the land development code, or not, sorry, the future land use, and he's also going to be working on policies for housing. So some of that might be looking at what kind of density increases he might allow in different areas. It sounds like everybody's kind of in favor of all of these in a limited amount and in specific locations.
Okay, so you've got a flavor for where we're thinking. Okay, good.
And I would like to see too some, maybe some more detail on this kind of mechanism, what incentives and how they would work and what value we would place on those incentives so we can start talking some of the numbers. And the idea is if we do exclusively a workforce housing project, like we're talking, it's the average size of the house on the island now is significantly bigger than we would be talking for this. So there's a way to word that where it's not necessarily making a bigger project, but maybe more smaller units as a workforce housing project, and that make that come up with a plan. So if it's exclusively workforce housing, it's a whole separate set of zoning requirements.
One item that Eddie had asked me about is that a lot of communities have minimum unit sizes, and we don't have anything like that for actual residential units. We have that for, I think, hotels, motels, and timeshares. But would there be any interest in having maximum sizes, and then saying that workforce units could not be any smaller than X percentage of a specific type of unit? Or do we want to stay completely away from that and base it solely on the building code.
Okay.
If we don't have any minimum right now, it seems like that's not standing in our way. So I'm not sure we need
Yeah,
to.
that gives you the maximum flexibility.
Yeah, so I think
I think his concern
that's,
was.
we've got a lot of other things to monkey with, so
think
I don't know
his-
that,
oh, Sorry.
go ahead, no.
I think that his main concern was that workforce units may be created that were smaller than we considered reasonable living space.
People will live in a closet to be at the beach.
Absolutely true.
But is it appropriate for people to live in a closet to be at the beach?
Well, I think, it's, we're sort of, as we think about this concept, sort of looking at the sort of the European model where, sort of your living room is, the patios of a restaurant or whatever, or you go to the beach, it's not really, your living room is not really in your house per se, your apartment per se. So, I think, the national tiny house movement and all of that type of stuff. So, I think that there's a trend, particularly with the younger folks, towards less is more. The other thing is that, as we develop an amount of money and, we look at potential buildings or land on Fort Myers Beach, just remember this. We're always gonna get a little better bang for our buck just off the island, if that becomes feasible. And that's what I initially talked to Marcus about, was something along the public transit corridor on St. Carlos Boulevard, as a piece of property that, we were gonna get perhaps more units on it and that type of thing. So, that was my initial conversation with him, because, land and issues on the island here are kind of tough, but that doesn't mean we can't look at things like this.
But I would just say a couple of comments, because we looked at some urban properties in Salt Lake City. And, the big thing is taking industrial properties or commercial properties and converting them into, lofts. And a lot of the designs are pretty funky, and they're nothing like we would consider to be a standard apartment with a closed-off bedroom, living room and a kitchen. They're all very open, all kind of work within the space allotted, as opposed to saying, we want to try to get as many of this type of block in them. And I think that's pretty accepted. I mean, people kind of like that. The other thing, Roger, is I think, to me, these people, the people who work here have jobs, I think they're an asset to be on the island. And I understand economics, something just off the island, like San Carlos Island. If you're too far off the island, then people are stuck in traffic again. It really doesn't help us. But having young working people here, they go to cafes, they go to the galleries. They're a good part of the fabric of our community, and I think I definitely prefer to have them on the island.
Well, and we have a property that's not being utilized for, I would say, almost a decade, that's sitting there empty.
And to your,
We obviously need to do something to make this into a useful property.
to your point, Madam Vice Mayor, Councilor Allers, did you feel like you got the answers that you needed for the developer that you were talking to that was looking at this property? I guess, I hate to leave this discussion just without some sort of teeth, but on either we designate you to pursue this, or we designate Sarah to reach out to the owner. I just think we ought to hopefully get some momentum behind this, because I love the idea.
Well, I can tell you that in my conversations with them, they've done this before in Virginia. They've got some big units that they've done up there, so they're fully aware of how it works. Their biggest fear was the unknown. What was the council going to do as far as making the necessary changes to the land development code and the comp plan to be able to accomplish what we've been talking about here? So I think if we can make the direction to move forward with what Sarah did very well here in her little briefing for us as initial actions, that's the first step, I think, is getting the comfortability level up for the developers that have the money to be able to do this, to know that we are in favor of doing it, or that we're going to move forward with the changes needed for it to be a viable project for them. Because they were very much, the two that I spoke to, they were very much in favor of the 30 to 50 year thing. Did not scare them one bit. They liked having the commercial underneath, but it has to be a viable project for them as well. So this building in particular was one that we discussed. But again, until they feel more comfortable with spending that kind of money, they aren't going to do it, obviously, until we get closer to saying this is what's going to happen and this is what it's going to be.
So with respect to that, there's a couple of things we could theoretically do. One is that I think you all have spoken around the point, but think it would be good to just sort of say on the point that we're open to any and all reasonable workforce housing proposals. So that would be one thing to let them know that, you know, each of you saying that individually out loud would give hopefully them a level of comfort. The other thing is that, you know, in terms of our money, we can say that, hey, to show you that you're not going to be putting out your money, 100% of your money, to find out that, you know, you get down the road and you hit it in, you know, a point of where you can't get through the door, is we will help fund some of the upfront costs to show you that sort of our money is where our mouth is. So I think, you know, with those two concepts, we could probably encourage people to think out of the box, where perhaps their viewpoint of prior councils may have been that they were a little more rigid and less flexible.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm certainly up for any kind of, you know, joint venture that would stretch our dollars so we could do more with them.
Yeah, I think it's gonna take a collaboration of both the town, the county, and, you know, private developers to be able to make this as successful as I think it can be. So whatever I need to say, I'm fully in favor of moving forward with, you know, the discussions that we've had as far as changing the comp plan to accelerate this as quickly as we can. Because it's not getting any cheaper out there.
I'm on board.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
I would
Thank
say
you.
just by virtue of our conversations today, we'll be getting inquiries about that property, so, the one you brought forward, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, the price may have just gone up.
Wouldn't surprise, yeah, exactly. Now the government's involved, the price is skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a good discussion. Marcus, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Appreciate your input. Sarah, thank you. The next item is the tree protection code. Discussion of Murph's suggested changes to the tree protection code. Who wants to start this off?
Well, I'll start by saying that the town, and I think several of you are concerned by the, you know, clearing of valuable trees from properties for, you know, as part of the overall issue of people trying to maximize what they could build on their land. And basically not having a mechanism to replace that canopy. You know, if it does have to be, if a valuable tree has to be removed when there's no alternative. So that became the impetus of the concern, and as you said, Murph jumped in and forwarded some recommendations to you, and so this is really your opportunity to discuss whether you think it's a serious concern and what the appropriate measures are, if you feel that there are measures necessary to protect and enhance the town's tree canopy.
Well, I'm definitely on board that we need to do something. To me, it's gotten to a crisis point with clear cutting on the island. I looked at the suggested wording here, and it says Marine Task Force changes are highlighted, and then on page 12, for example, it's highlighted the removal of up to 3 protected trees. I thought we would already decided that was to be stricken, and then they highlighted it. I'm not sure what it is that Murph was recommending there.
It's struck through, though.
But I thought we already had decided that, so.
Well, yeah, so our issue is that we had a philosophical conversation and some staff direction. But now it's a matter of getting the ordinance in sync with that. to
I guess
make
I
it
don't
clear.
understand.
So,
Is by highlighting that section, is Murph saying, yes, we agree that council
think they're
wanted to
saying
strike
that-
this section?
yeah, I think that's what they're trying to say.
Okay, that was confusing to me.
So let me just generally say this. So first of all, we think the only way, from a staff perspective, that we can be sure that the council's rules, and whether you say they can retain 1 tree or 2 trees or no trees, whatever it is is to require before you cut down any tree, require a free inspection from the town, so that we can see what you're doing and see it's in compliance with whatever rules you put in place. Because, other than that, there's gonna be a loophole for someone to get around.
Is that in here?
I believe it's on
I don't remember
I believe it's on the cover sheet, but,
But it's not in the suggested wording?
no, because that wasn't from Murph, that's from staff.
No, so what you're saying is something that we need to yet even add to this?
Yes, if you agree
Okay.
with the concept.
It sounds necessary to me to add it.
And then from there, it's, okay, what regulations you want to put in place in terms of what they can could cut down, and why they can cut it down versus why they can't, and what the replacement process would be in terms of replenishing the stock. So, and just kind of, wrap our arms around the issue. If the tree's in the middle of the lot and you can't shift to the house, either way, obviously, they're gonna have to cut it down and replace it. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is, well, the way they wanna orientate their house requires that a tree to be cut down. So for a little lesser view, they may not have to, but for a better view, they have to, and what's the replacement formula in that scenario? So you sort of have we have no choice, we have to cut it down. If we're gonna build a structure on the lot, and then you have the other ones where by maybe shrinking the structure a little bit or turning the structure a little bit, it would be avoidable, and what the appropriate recapture of the canopy would be under that scenario. Obviously, if it's an invasive or non-valuable species, that's a whole different thing, and we're not really overly concerned about that. We're only concerned about that from the standpoint of, I cut down a valuable tree, but I thought it was one of these, and, I thought it was a non-valuable tree. So we can cover that issue by us doing the upfront free inspection.
I just want to be careful that we're not, if someone buys a property and they choose that they don't want to have any trees on there, we want to cut the trees down because we just don't want them. Is that a viable option for them? Should they choose to, however we word this, pay into a fund if that's the way it needs to be? We'll pay a fund to replace the tree somewhere else on the island. I just don't want it in my yard.
That's up to you, but yes. I mean, if you want a little property to allow it to be sort of scalped, that's up to you all. We've had arguments about landscaping is good, but we don't want landscaping to block view corridors, so, there is a balance to be talked about. But, someone just says, well, for the sake of, I don't want to have to spend money on any landscape maintenance whatsoever, therefore I want to scalp my property. It's up to you whether you want to allow that or not.
Well,
You collectively.
If you allow that, then technically, everybody on the island could say, I want to scalp my property, and then we've got a bald island.
Well, I'm not saying I'm for that. I was just simply asking a question. I mean,
No, I get where you're coming from, but if we completely allow them to have no landscape, no trees, no plantings of anything at all on their property, then, and there's so many reasons that we need it. I mean, it helps keep the island from washing away, basically, that we have
Well,
landscaping.
And
So-
there's a lot of people who take a strictly utilitarian view. They buy a house, they are gonna, via vacation rental or a rental in some means, and they just go through and wanna take all the vegetation out, put down rocks, so they minimize the maintenance. That's a model that happens all over the island. And the idea is that's maybe want to encourage or discourage.
I would want to discourage that myself. There's some brand-new houses down there, right on the boulevard, on the bay side of the boulevard, right before, block or two before you get to Publix going north. Beautiful new homes, but devoid of any landscaping, just a beautiful lawn, beautiful new sod in there, but no trees, no bushes, no nothing. And it looks odd. It looks very odd to me. In an otherwise fairly lush island, I certainly wouldn't want to encourage that sort of development here. That's just my own opinion.
Well, that's another point too, that when you build a large monolithic house, it looks more monolithic when there's no vegetation around it. It looks larger.
So Roger, I guess this is on the agenda to get our feedback, and if I was keeping track of all the things you said, you added at least 3 major things that aren't in here that you still thought needed to be added.
Well, I mentioned conceptual things.
Right.
Right, so if you agree that those concepts are good, you're correct, Madam Vice Mayor, that those things would be, if they're endorsed by members of council, when we bring it back for first reading, we would incorporate those things.
And I think all 3 of them in some form need to be added, so just for the record.
That's my person.
One of the other things
I would agree.
had a question, yeah, I don't disagree. One of the other questions I had in here was with the tree fund itself. It seems a little vague to me. The fund, I'm not opposed to the fund, I just feel that it needs to be a little bit, it needs to be worded a little bit better, you know, in here, they talk about the requirements needed for the homeowner or the person removing the trees has to go through, they have to talk to an arborist, they have to do all of these things to be able to do what they want to do. But under the tree fund, it basically just says, if you're going to do that, we're gonna tell you what you have to pay us. There's no guidelines in there that the town should have to follow, conversely, to do the same thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is is there a way to put in there that you're gonna pay to the tree fund should you choose to, but these, you know, whether it's an average of 3 nurseries, this is what the cost would be to replace that tree? The way it's worded to me, it's just basically, we're gonna tell you what you're gonna pay, and that's what it's gonna be. And I think that needs to be a little bit more clear.
Where are you looking?
On the very last page, on page 23, under the tree fund, it basically just says that penalties, fines, tree replacement payments, but it doesn't say how you're gonna come to those fines or those
And I think
penalties.
one of the other samples we had something like that in it, Dan, so if
We could look at
you
that to
could go
create
back to
some
those others.
parameters for that.
There
And then,
was something.
and then let's remember, not that we want, you know, to fill up the agenda, but anytime the staff makes a determination, it's always, everything we do is always appealable to the council. So if we say it should be, you know, $30,000, and the person says that, well, I think it should be 15, they always have a route to come here and ask for that.
And Roger, I appreciate that. However, I think for people to make educated decisions on what they want to do, the more information that we can give them. I mean, you don't just go buy a house and say, well, I can always remodel it
No, I
later.
think it's appropriate, your comment, that we should have some criteria on how we price out,
Yeah.
the town would price out the impact.
Sure, so that, it's pretty open that if I want to remove these trees, it's going to cost me this much money. There's not a, well, I'm not sure, or I can come back and argue it, or I can come.
Well, I'm sure they can come back and argue.
Well, sure, but, but I mean, but at least they would know up front to make an
Well,
educated decision.
In terms of your level of comfort, that we're not just, you know, playing Yahtzee with some dice to come up with a number, we'll put in how we would calculate our number.
And it's kind of mentioned in the green sheet too, the costs, but it's just an example, it's not like a.
Just an example, but costs change, you know, and if there's a clear direction of 3 nurseries, we'll take the average of 3 I'm just using that as an example, but
Mechanism. to
just
say-
a mechanism that you know, then they can take and do the legwork and follow that guideline and go say, based on the 3 nurseries I talked to, it's gonna cost me this much.
Yeah, I think in some of the detailed information, we sort of allude to a methodology, but we can, you know, I'll expand upon that.
Okay, thank you.
I saw Chad get up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, he was just reminding me that we alluded to a methodology, but
Okay.
Chad, feel free to come up.
Okay, so, morning, Chad Schutz, environmental staff. So if you read in there, there is a reference to the determining the mitigation value of roadside vegetation, which is incorporated into, I think it's state statute, or maybe it's state administrative code. But there is a methodology. It's arborist, developed by Florida Arborist Association.
Where are you referring to in here, so I can?
So if you read on the last page of the highlighted section right above the tree fund,
Page 22, okay.
yeah, I don't have your packet number,
That's
sorry.
okay. No problem.
So then the mitigation value of the removed trees shall be paid into the town's tree fund where mitigation is necessary. An appraisal prepared by a qualified tree professional using the appropriate appraisal method found in determining mitigation value of roadside vegetation, revision October 2020, which is incorporated herein by reference. And then I also included that methodology in your packet, or it should be there, and I can provide that and walk you through it. That's with the Florida chapter of International Society of Arboriculture.
Okay.
So is the next step that the staff then will be adding some things to this sample and bringing it back to us at a regular council meeting now?
Yes, so we'll take your input from today and we'll incorporate the things that we saw head nods on or verbal statements to incorporate. And it'll be up for first reading and
Okay.
Good. Thanks, Chad. All right. 2 down, 1 to go. Last item is the fiscal year 2023 budget discussion. Roger?
Okay, so this is the kickoff really for the council's direct involvement with the preparation of the '23 budget. And as you may recall, our typical process is we set a preliminary roll in June, and we set the final millage and budget in September. And the preliminary millage you set in June is one that you can come down from, but you can't go above. So it's important for us collectively to have a period of time that if there are any council initiatives or things you would like us to cost out or possibly include in the budget, for us to nail down the potential cost of those items from the standpoint of figuring out whether or not they would have an impact on that preliminary millage or not. So that's sort of the group discussion we'll have in a minute. With respect to where we stand this fiscal year, where, as we mentioned earlier, we will have some additional money from our parking revenues. We're comfortable saying it'll be $500,000 or more. We believe that we will have some other revenues that will exceed their projection, but we just don't have, right now we're using half-year numbers or 7-month numbers, so it's a little early to commit to that. We should, on the expenditure side, not go over on expenditures, be hopefully slightly under. As you recall, we did cobble together $1 million for the purchase of land behind Town Hall here, so that will impact what we would have had for savings had we not done that. Our reserves are, for the most part, haven't been banged around too much. We did have 2 long-term employees leave, so we have some post-employment payouts to them that will have a little bit of an impact on our budget. But generally speaking, we're in strong financial shape. I think the auditor told you that the other day. Our operating costs are, as a town, are probably one of the better ones of municipalities throughout the state. Our millage rate is definitely one of the best within the state. So I think we're being providing a good level of service at a fair price to our taxpayers and ratepayers. We are being challenged with the job market, as everyone else is. It's very common for the value of jobs for people. We're paying them $20. They can get the same job somewhere else for $30 and more, per hour. So we are being challenged that way. And Sherry and I have been talking about what we can do to do a little bit more for our employees to ensure that we retain our employees. We have a lot invested in them as they have in us, and, you know, we don't want them running away from us for another, you know, $5 an hour or something like that. So, we have that challenge on our side to work through. But you have talked about a couple initiatives, you know, in council comments, lighting, crosswalks, and a variety of other things, affordable housing today. So, to the extent that you have some thoughts and things you would like us to cost out, so we could be better prepared to deal with real numbers in June, that would be helpful.
Any comments?
Gee, everybody's being quiet. I guess my wish list would include a line item for further landscaping of Estero Boulevard. I know the county gave us some money, but I'd like to see us put some more money toward that now that the project is complete. As I was driving in this morning, I noticed a lot of areas where we have no trees or, you know, and I know that we're limited in what we can do, but there are some areas, like in front of Charlie's, that are much wider than others, and there's not a tree to be seen in that block. So I guess a line item for landscaping Estero Boulevard. I'd also like to see a line item for Estero Boulevard streetlights. I am aware that that's a very large project and not something that we're going to accomplish. I mean, even the county did the road in phases, so we may have to break it down into parts, but at least that we have a line item going toward that. I'd like to see that. And this one's a little premature because we haven't really talked about it yet, although I mentioned it at the last meeting, whether we're going to need a line item for what we do with the land behind Town Hall. What I mentioned previously was at least we spend some money to turn it into an area that we can park some of our vehicles back there until we decide on a larger, more permanent idea of what to do with it. I think that's probably a minimal cost at this point, and I don't know whether that would be needed to be set out in the budget or not.
Yeah,
or-
well,
just-
yes, it would, I think, from, you know, for two reasons. One is, we budget for sort of continuing our current level of service, so anytime we have something that's sort of new, it's initiative, and it creates that, and of course, the policy of the majority of council, being in favor of doing that. In just for order of magnitude sake, we're looking at the price of the entrance lot into Bay Oaks as sort of, what that would be to create some minimal parking, additional parking behind Town Hall as sort of a basis of cost.
So those are my three things. Off the top of my head, I reserve the right to add to it.
But of course. Bill?
Well, I would say that, some things that I'm gonna ask for, one is, I'd like to change the short-term rental fee structure and add like a per-bedroom charge. I think that there's a lot of money that needs to really get workforce housing off the blocks, and from what I've read in the trades, I mean, vacancy rates are down by 25%, and rates are up on short-term housing by like 30%, so an increase in fees would be decimal dust, as they say. I'd also like to have if we consolidate the committees, if that goes through, that we have the three committees become one, I'd like to see that committee get a budget for coming up with the creative use of the properties that we're spending a lot of money on. And in my idea, that I think that we can tie that committee to the TDC by having the liaison for that committee be whoever's the liaison for the TDC. And then in the parking, when you were talking about the parking at Town Hall, one thing that's always pretty obvious to me is that with the pneumatic system that we have back here for the bank, that it really makes pretty inefficient use of the space around there for existing parking. So I wouldn't mind seeing something drawn up to get an idea of the cost of removing that and just making this into a more efficient use for the space.
So additional parking and demolishing the existing drive-through?
Right, and make that into additional parking, and maybe it works coincides with the vice mayor, that if we're doing this demolition, we'll have certainly, while that's going on and while the work could be going on, we need a place to park. So it could be a temporary thing until we get that done. Just an idea, plan, how much it costs it is, and that's pretty much what I have.
I agree with that concept. I mean, I've thought about that for a long time with that parking back there, eliminating the drive-throughs, but also possibly having parking down underneath and maybe adding a story or two above it to increase the size of town hall. But that's something also to consider, I think.
I guess keeping some kind of shady area for employees to eat out there, if you're gonna tear that out, I'd like to see something retained for,
Well, all that
shady area.
underneath.
And, you know, with room, there could be, vegetation would be good. We could also do like a solar panel roof over the parking for energy efficiency. And right now, it's like there's 5 people who get to park in the shade out there.
I like the idea of that. I had it on my list as well, but almost the other direction of building it out. You know, there's a lot of expensive equipment that sits out there in the sun that the town pays for and the taxpayers pay for that unnecessarily gets wrecked very quickly from the sun. I would like to see a covered space out there to be able to put some of those high dollar items inside to protect from the elements. And we all have cars and we know the beating that they take sitting outside in the sun and the salt and the sand, as opposed to tearing it down, or maybe conversely look at it both ways, what the cost might be to tear it down versus building it out to be able to house some of those bigger ticket items inside and still have the roof, with solar panel or sitting area for employees or something.
So let me see if I can sort of wrap my arms around what I think I'm hearing you say. You would like us to look at potentially getting rid of overly encumbered area of the bank drive-through where it's very narrow and there's a lot of concrete, to maybe something that sits on, 4 or 6 columns that would provide a flat concrete cover for our equipment initially, and then potentially could be built on if the town ever wanted to expand town hall capacity.
Well, I
Is
think
that
that
what-
would be very important to be able to have it so that it could be expanded should it need to down the road.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna put columns and we're gonna put a cover, we might as well make it so we could build on it later.
but in the meantime, we could still stick some solar panels on it.
Right, well, it's fine, we can put some solar panels on it, that's correct.
All right, well, if you're done.
Yes, sir.
The lighting, I agree with Madam Vice Mayor. I think that's very important, not necessarily just for Estero, but the rest of the island eventually is going to need some sort of lighting. North Estero is gonna need to be lit. I think we've beat the lighting to death enough to know what we're looking to do, but I think it's time we start putting some money aside for when that day comes, hopefully sooner than later, however that works out. And then also, I think it doesn't come without any surprise that I'd like to see community policing back in there again. I think we've had a year for that discussion. Some fees have been raised where I think some money could be allocated towards it. I think there's been enough discussion. We don't have to go through it all again. Hopefully, my fellow councilors have heard from some of their constituents over the year, that it is wanted, it is needed, and it would be appreciated.
I guess the thing I would still say about that, until the sheriff's department comes back to us and says they're willing, that we have some say in what they're going to use that community policing for. I want to, if I dedicate money to give to them for that, I want to be able to say to them, you are going to enforce more of our laws about the things that we're concerned about, the electric bikes on the sidewalk kind of thing. And the only feedback I got was that they were unwilling to accept any guidance from us about the use of those funds. So I'm not gonna be moved until I hear that they're moving some.
Well, I understand your point. I think in here, and just by natural reasoning, if there's more people here, they're gonna have more time. As they explained several times, when you have 2 dedicated deputies on the island, they have to stay fairly close to their vehicles should an emergency happen on the opposite end of the island from where they may be at. With community policing, they have the ability to put them on bicycles, put them on 4-wheelers, keep them on the road.
And that's what I want to be able to say to them. I want this to be used for somebody on a bicycle, for example. But The feedback I got was that we had absolutely no input.
Well,
So
I think that they'd
that's-
be open to that kind of thing. I think my understanding was that they don't want us to say, you need to have this deputy here from this time to this time to enforce just
I
this.
understand it can't be too specific, but I was told we had no input.
But just a point, we're not really debating whether or not to include these in the budget, we're just trying to get an idea, let people offer whatever they want to
I
offer.
just wanted to let him know what I needed to have come back to me.
That's not how they sold it to us. They sold it to us by saying that their people were dedicated down there between the hours of 9 to 5, 5, 7 days a week, whatever it was. That's how it was sold to me. So that tells me that, they're gonna be here for 5 or 6 days a week, whatever it is, with those hours of the day, and that's it,
Yeah, well, I didn't take it that way, and I can tell you with my several conversations with them, that is not the intent. Is 9 to 5, they're gonna be here. Some days they'll be here at night. Some days they'll be here in the morning. Sometimes they'll be here in the mid-afternoon.
The model that they kept holding up to us was Bonita Springs, and they had them down there all day, every day, and that's how it was sold to us.
Well, I mean, we're talking 16 versus 2 or 4.
It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter.
Anyway,
The model's the
I
same.
know I got us off track by
All right,
that.
that's fine. I just wanted, I'd like to see it added in there, and
But
we
I
can
thought
have
it
these
was only fair
discussions.
to give you what I would need to see coming back
Okay.
if you want to support that.
Fair enough. Those are the things that I had on my wish list.
That's a pretty exhaustive list, and I'm certainly open to all of the things I've heard today.
Yay.
I just, the only thing I didn't hear, and I hate to, I don't even know if it reaches the threshold of this discussion, but I know CellCab voted unanimously for 2 swing sets at Newton Park. I haven't heard that mentioned. Is that in the list, Roger?
Gotta be on the add-on list.
That would be,
Wouldn't the TDC be able to pay for that?
they don't do playground equipment.
Oh, that's up there with picnic
Yeah,
tables.
yeah, unfortunately, yeah. But I think the estimate was somewhere between 12 and 15,000, I think, because they want to also do a surface underneath the swing set, that rubberized surface and so forth, so. Anyways, but that's the only thing I hadn't heard mentioned today, but I appreciate the discussion.
Oh, well, maybe we should float that out there to the community if somebody wants a memorial swing set with some loved one's name on it.
That would be an option. If the funding's not available, trust me, I've thought about that, and I know some of the condos around that area where we'd market it to, but I'm hoping to fund that through the normal channels. But if not, that's an option, yep.
If that were the case, I think we'd still have the bocce courts out there. Anything else? We'll move on to to our last item, which is
Nothing from you, Mayor?
I don't have anything right now. That was a boatload full of stuff here to consider. I have a few things in mind, but there'll be more discussion. Okay, the last item is agenda management. Anybody have anything they want to add on to the agenda management?
I have 2 things.
Okay.
We all found in our mailbox a copy of a report regarding sea level rise in Captiva, with some very specific information about what was happening to their island. My feeling, and I am not a scientist, is that I have seen what I believe to be effects of sea level rise on our island. I believe there are some streets that are now periodically flooding, not from stormwater, but from high tides, and they're flooding more and more often. So I guess I'd like to see an item added to our agenda as to, I don't know whether we need to do a study like Captiva did, or something ongoing as to whether this is something we need to look at for protection of our island from sea level rise.
Now, wasn't that something that the governor talked about just yesterday? They're talking about
I
modeling.
have to admit, I didn't listen to what the governor said yesterday.
Well, I think the intent of the press release was to talk about funding for this resiliency. The first part of the resiliency compact is to model the county in different scenarios. And I got the impression that that's what he called it for, but of course it got off on other politics.
Well, so then I take it that you're in agreement with me that we add this to agenda management?
Sure.
Okay. So I got 2. The other thing I'd like to add to agenda management is the discussion of the property behind Town Hall. We did some preliminary discussion today. Dan had a great idea about sheltering the parking for our expensive equipment. So I'd like to see a a discussion of the land behind Town Hall added to agenda management.
Sounds good.
I got a second. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm gonna probably get shot for even saying this, but I was really a kind of a first question for the town attorney. And I don't profess to have all the answers on this, but we've all heard this, the discussion about the sidewalks and the bike traffic on the sidewalks, and there's 1,000 different ideas out there, and many of them are good ideas. But one of the simplest suggestions that a constituent raised with me that I just thought I'd potentially put on for an M&P discussion if the town attorney thinks that it passes muster. And I've thought of so many different, I've heard so many suggestions on this subject, and they're all interesting and innovative. But I think this one might be potentially, if legal, something that might be worth talking about, is can we have an ordinance? I know the state law requires that bikes be allowed on the sidewalks, and I get that, and there are certain areas on Estero where you want to be on the sidewalk if you're on a bike, because it's dangerous. Would state law allow for us to have an ordinance that if you were on your bicycle on the sidewalk and you were to pass a pedestrian, that you would be required to walk your bike as you pass the pedestrian? And let me just, before I'll give you a second to think about it. Let me give you a little more color, because my thinking is, and certainly somebody who's here year round, there's nobody on the sidewalks, and as someone who loves to bike, I go on the sidewalks when no one's around, and it's safer, and there's no issues, and then if I see a pedestrian coming up, I'll either get off my bike and walk it, or I'll go back out on the street, because there's all kinds of ways to weave in and out. And if we require that, then you're going to have this comity between the pedestrian and the biker that I don't think exists in many cases today. And just again, I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Town Attorney, but is that something that's even worth, and my colleagues, is that something even worth the conversation?
If I could jump in, I think I would even take it a step further. We already have a rule that says you have to walk your bike in Times Square, so obviously we can say you have to walk your bike in certain areas. Maybe that's what we need to look at, rather than saying you just get off if there's a pedestrian in the area, that if there's a really dangerous area down there, that we can say, just extend Times Square out and say, this is an area you have to walk your bike.
Looking at the town attorney to opine on, that's it. I never thought about it like that, but that's an interesting philosophy.
Either scenario, I think that it's something that as I understand current state law limitations, as well as what it actually does allow, that's something we could look into if that's the direction. I wouldn't be telling you the truth. I'd need to make sure and take a look. But for safety purposes, that's the law already does provide that the bicyclists are supposed to yield to the pedestrians when on the sidewalk. So taking that one step further, I think certainly is within the purview of the town council. Your direction, we'll do some research and report back to you that that's something that yes, you could do, and or conversely, you can just say, hey, if your research indicates that you can do that, Mr. Town Attorney, please go ahead and begin the process of working with staff to draft an ordinance.
Well, I'd rather maybe hash this out at M&P first, if people are comfortable talking about it further.
Definitely.
Okay. And again, the concept is only when passing the pedestrian. Obviously, the pedestrian always has right of way, but I think if we limit it to passing the pedestrian, I mean, when you come up behind people who are walking, especially on these narrow sidewalks, I mean, some people ring the bell, some people say on your left, and then people confuse what left and right, and then they move in the wrong direction. It's chaos. But if somebody just, as they approach them, quietly got off their bike, or, you may have instances where someone's still on their bike and just sort of pushing with their foot on the ground as they go by, at least they're slowing down. There's time for the pedestrian to be aware of their presence and react accordingly. And it just creates a civility in this process that I think is missing in many instances.
I'll just point out something that seems obvious to me, and I understand, like, we already have a walk your bike on Times Square, walk your bike over the bridge, even though that was where the woman was hit recently with an e-bike and ended up with stitches. But I'm thinking that, okay, if you're riding up behind somebody and then you get off and walk, and they're walking, you're never gonna pass them because you're both walking.
And that's okay.
Well,
But then they're walking forever. So if one pedestrian's on the sidewalk, then they're walking forever.
You're at the beach, you should be slowed down.
Well, that never really pans out, because now we're saying this is an important, you're saying simply logistically, I mean, you're saying that you ride your bike until there's a pedestrian, and then you're not riding your bike anymore.
Well, then you ride on the street, because you're allowed, if you're in a hurry, you ride on the street. Real bicyclists ride on the street with helmets.
I'm not arguing, you're saying, logistically.
If you're in a hurry, you
if
ride
become-
out there.
If you ride your bike until you come across a pedestrian and you become a pedestrian, then you are a pedestrian. You're never gonna pass them, probably, to get back on your bike.
But you have the option. You ride on the street then.
I'm just saying this to the.
it's an interesting thought, Counselor Veach, but I do think that probably 75% of the people who ride a bike, particularly a non-motorized bike, maybe even 100, maybe even 95%, have the ability to pick up their pace to pass somebody while walking their bike, I think. But you raise an interesting point. This is open for discussion, but I do think, you just pick up your pace when you're passing somebody, when you're walking your bike. I mean, I assume they'd have that physical capability to do that, but food for thought.
Before we move on, there's two additional items for you to consider as we move forward with this concept. One, obviously, that we would have to get the buy-in of the county, because the sidewalks are theoretically their sidewalks because it's part of their right of way. Number two, signage. Again, we would have to work with the county because you can't adopt a regulation and not then put people on notice what that is and that they may be in jeopardy of a citation if they fail to do so. And then third but not least is working with the sheriff's office for enforcement purposes and then our staff as well for enforcement purposes, because part of the issue that I think that has frustrated this council in this community for some time is that there are some of these regulations on the books, but they're hard to enforce without the cooperation of multiple parties.
I think that's an excellent point, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard anecdotally people who are walking will holler at a biker saying, "You can't ride your bike on the sidewalk." Well, the state law says that you have to be able to ride your bike on the sidewalk, so maybe this is kind of a nice compromise with an attempt towards civility. That's the way I'm looking at this.
And, it's interesting because there's precedents, because there's state law saying you have to be able to ride your bike on the sidewalk, but then the state road on the bridge, there's a sign saying walk your bike. So there's obviously some precedents.
Think about that.
Well, this conversation has been particularly thrilling to me, only because I finally found out today who that one person on the island is that gets off his bike and lets people go around him, and that's Councilman Jim Adderholt. So
Not always, but I'm going to get better, yeah.
I think we're going to give you an award for that. Okay, anything else?
No, thank you.
Anything else for anybody?
Yeah, I actually would like to, I know it kind of fell on deaf ears before, but I think based on the conversation we had today about the affordable housing and density and parking, I really think we need to take a look at the parking garage ordinance that I brought up earlier about, maybe looking at some of the restrictions that are in there. If people are going to be building buildings that are going to house affordable housing as well as commercial underneath, the way that the current code is written for parking garages, they would never be able to have a place for people to park. So I think we need to take a look at that to make it work in conjunction with what we're talking about doing with the sustainable housing.
Let me just see why I'm open. Not only am I open to that, I think it's an interesting idea. I was approached the other day by a huge employer on our island with an idea for creating a parking garage for workforce, and then potentially coupling it with some workforce housing. And they were very intrigued by that option because there's clearly a need, and I don't know and I know the mayor's raised some concerns about it, and I get it. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think a conversation in that area would be harmful.
If the conversation you had is with the same one that I had at the time, it was not, workforce housing was not in the equation, it was condominiums. And I don't know if their tune has changed.
I wonder if it's the same person, because I didn't hear the condo piece. Yeah.
I'll ask you that later.
Okay.
But, anything else, Dan?
I got a second,
Yes.
in the words of Madam Vice
Yes, you
Chair.
already got a second.
Yes.
Okay.
And I want to add one thing here. You know, that it's part of the transportation thing, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I'd like to see if we can get consensus to present to the DOT, is that when you're coming onto the island along the white wall, there is probably a good mile where the turn lane is blocked off almost entirely. Right, that there's all the strips there, and that's extra space. That it seems to me that if we did a lane shift there, had a trolley or like a van lane through there, that would be a way to help with mass transit, help people get to the island faster, maybe encourage people to use a trolley, and maybe allow businesses to use a van to get their people on the island more efficiently. And I think if we can talk about this and come up with a unified plan to present to DOT, then maybe it'll be, have more impact than just me saying it.
I'm open to having a
I'm
conversation.
open to that too, but I think you should go further than that. I think the lane should be all the way down to Pine Ridge Road. I mean, just have a dedicated trolley lane all the way down. I see what you wanted to
That
just,
would be an MPO thing, wouldn't it?
it sure would. It sure would. Anything else?
I got two on that, at least.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll defer, just before you adjourn, Councilmember Veach has two comments, so I don't want to intrude on this portion for you all, but I just wanted to make a very brief announcement before you adjourn.
Okay. Are you done, Bill?
I'm done.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
As many of you all know, my daughter will be graduating from college in the week of the 16th of May. And as a result, I won't be here for that council meeting. So I will be sending Mr. Snabry in my absence. And I just want to let you all know that that's the reason why I will be going. I won't be here is to be able to enjoy the fruits of 26 years.
Your investment?
Yeah, my investment, my retirement plan. So I just wanted to let you all know that. Okay, that's it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So does this mean since you have fewer expenses now that your fees will be lowered?
I don't know if it's going to be.
It's always nice to get a
I
raise.
see. I see.
Doesn't have a job yet.
I see a subsidy for a while still.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn at
You should be happy with that time, Mr.
10:42. Thank you.
Gary would be very proud of you.
That was a very productive.